Hello everyone, this is James Shore with a recap of my Let's Play Test-Driven Development series. Uh, what this recap contains is episodes 11 through 20 of my series, and what you're seeing is those 10 episodes going by at 10 times speed. So it's all compressed to fit in within a single episode. What I'm doing is I'm creating from scratch a retirement planning tool using test-driven development. And the purpose of this recap and the others like it is to sort of catch you up to where we're at without you having to watch all 150 minutes of episodes up until now. So after you finish this, you should be able to pick up with episode 21 and have some general idea what's going on. What's going on right now is I'm working on the stock market year class. That is the only serious class in the application at this point. Spent the first 10 years getting this up and running, and it's pretty much feature complete. But I had a really hard time working on it. So what you see me doing here is just trying to clean up the tests. Mostly what I'm doing is consolidating all the tests. I was finding it really hard to understand what's going on. There's some not particularly complex but tricky business rules that for whatever reason I was having trouble wrapping my head around, and lots of different tests for that. So I'm bringing all the tests together into groups of tests that I think speak more clearly. In the process, as I'm doing that, I'm actually breaking some of the rules that people have about test-driven development. Not me, obviously, but some people feel that test-driven development is really, you're really only supposed to have one assertion per test. It's something you'll hear people say. I don't buy it. Obviously, I've got multiple assertions in each of these tests. What's more important, in my opinion, is that your tests really speak clearly. There's lots of reasons to do testing in test-driven development. One of the reasons is documentation. You're documenting the way your code works so that when somebody else comes along in the future, they can understand how the class under test works and what your thought processes were. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm trying to improve the documentation quality of these tests. And it's my opinion, it was my opinion at the time, it still is, that having multiple assertions per test helps with that. Now, I'm not doing pair programming on these videos, and one of the real advantages of pair programming, which of course is one of the agile techniques, is that you don't have the sort of tunnel vision and this belief that what you think is right is what everybody thinks is going to think is right. So you end up with better quality code and more readable code because you get two perspectives. But without that, I'm doing the best I can, and I do think this reads more clearly. So lots of cleanup that you just saw finishing up here. We're going into episode 13 now. And at this point, I'd pretty much cleaned everything up. I was just putting some constants in. I'd moved the capital gains tax rate out of all the methods and into the constructor. That's what you can see happening right at this moment. And just wrapping that up. I was previously passing it into all the methods, and it worked, but all this code works, but it was just quite ugly. Every so often you're going to see red bars and green bars flash by. You actually don't see the green bars very often because they come up, and as soon as I see them, I press escape and get rid of them, get them off the screen. So you can't tell when I run the passing test as easily as you can tell when I run the failing test, because when I run the failing test, I just have to stop and look and see what's going on. So I finished, at this point in the video, I'd finished doing all the work on stock market year that I thought was important, and now I was tackling the primitive obsession. So I had my dollar amounts, my tax rates, and my interest rates all as integers. And right now what I'm trying to do is introduce real classes to cover those topics. And here you see me working on tax rate. I tried to use big decimal so I could have fixed point math, and man, it was ugly. It just was ugly. We should see that soon. Here we've got a simple tax, but I had to deal with a compound tax where the money you withdrew to pay the tax itself was taxed. And I think we'll see that come up in a moment. Yeah, so there's the test for the compound tax, figuring out what the right answer is. And now I'm going to try to make this work using big decimal. Check this out. There's the equation. and it just gets worse and worse and worse. It doesn't work. At that point, I said, screw it. Actually, I used stronger language than that in my head. I don't think I put it in the video, but it's like, forget this. Java not having operator overloading really made that clunky. I was like, well, you know, doubles are good enough. And I think they probably are. Now what I'm doing is I started to integrate this tax rate class into the stock market year, which I haven't done yet at this point. Then I realized it's not yet a value object, and that's what I was doing. Right at the end of the episode, I got that done using Eclipse's wonderful generate equals and hash code tool. So there we go, it's in. And now I'm starting to integrate it. I took that very, very slowly, very carefully. Lots of little piecewise steps. And it's a good thing I did because you can see all those red bars coming by. Even though I was going really slowly, I did make a lot of mistakes. Now, doing the same thing with interest rate. I'll just stop here and let you see this go by. It's pretty much the same code again, but simpler. Okay, now that I've got the interest rate in there, I'm going to go ahead and integrate it again very slowly. I introduced that rate method, which is just a way of exposing the internals of the interest rate so that I could slowly transform the existing uses of ints into interest rates and have them look like ints in the short term. And I said it was slow, but at 10 times speed it goes by pretty quick. So now I'm moving into dollars, and that actually turned out to be a little more complicated. I think we're going to see that. So same old value object stuff. If I had a nickel for every time I do this, I could buy several cups of coffee. So of course what I'm doing here is I'm trying to create a class that represents the concept of dollars, which are fundamental to this retirement planning app. What this is it's going to basically take my income and savings and so forth at the present day and extrapolate that into the future and tell me how much I'll have when I die and whether or not I'll have enough to live on in my retirement. I actually do have a spreadsheet that does this for me. It's very complex. We've just barely scraped the tip of the iceberg here in this program. And it's getting slow, and I'm starting to get concerned about bugs. I do have some self-tests actually in that spreadsheet. I do love my test-driven development, but spreadsheet isn't really a great tool for doing test-driven development in. Although, as a programming language, spreadsheets are pretty cool. They're very unique. I would love to see somebody write a spreadsheet where instead of using that sort of brain-dead formula language they have, you could use real programs in each cell and where it had better opportunities for abstraction. But it's a subject for another day. So I'm just really slowly getting the dollars in. Pretty soon, I think after a certain amount of doing the dollars, I came up against an interesting problem, which was that I did what I did with everything else. To get the primitive session taken out, I introduced this method called amount, which would allow me to expose the internal integer of the dollars. And I just sort of would put that in, and then as I convert things over to dollars, take it back out again. But when we got to dealing with the tax rate and the interest rate, I couldn't do that. and I discovered that I was going to have to keep the amount method after all. And I think we're going to see that fairly soon. Let's see what happens. Here you see me struggling a little bit with the idea that I'm having to say new dollars everywhere. In the end, I decided it was a good idea, but it seemed a little clunky, but it does speak nice and clearly. It's very clear about what we're expecting back, so I stuck with it. So here we go. This is where I started wondering how I was going to deal with this amount. Um, and in the end, I just said, well, I can't see a better way to do this, so I'm going to keep that amount method. So what I actually did was gave it a better name and wrote some tests around it. I decided to call it toInt and wrote some proper tests around it and kept it as a real method. And that's something that I do occasionally. That bothers me a little bit. I don't really want to expose the internal type underlying the dollars and the tax rate and so forth, because if I don't expose that internal type, it's really easy to change. And since I'm using floats, there is the risk of cumulative rounding error. I don't think it's really strong, given the size of the numbers we're dealing with over time. Even if it is off by a couple of pennies or even $50, it's not really going to matter for the purpose of this application. So we're coming to the end, finally finishing off the stock market year and the domain layer. What I did next was spent several hours doing research into UI technologies. Those are all presented in episode 19, which I've left out of this because it is itself a sort of montage of everything I went through. So skipping episode 9, went straight into episode 20, where I started working on the UI layer of the app. Started out, actually didn't do any test-driven development yet in the UI layer, just trying to get basic stub UI going for the purposes of doing manual checks. I call them desk checks, although that's not entirely accurate. Manual checks of the way things are connected together. And that's important with TDD. You have to check your assumptions because TDD won't check your assumptions for you. It'll just tell you that you programmed what you thought you were going to program. So here we see me putting in the basic UI. It's kind of fun to see the UI flash up like that. And that is bringing us to the end. And also brings us to present day. I'm recording this. As I'm recording this, we've only put up episode 20, so I hope you will come join us for episode 21, which will be going up later today. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.